And when I was in anatomy lab as an undergrad, we did dissections and things, and we used to think that fascia was just trash. And we would unwrap the body parts. Sorry if this is a little gross, but all of the fascia we would just dump in the trash. And it would be trash cans and trash cans and trash cans filled with fascia. And it was so interesting that we thought that way. I mean, I was always kind of like, wow, this is bizarre, because fascia is different. It can be different on different bodies, different places of the body. It can be smooth or rougher or thick or thin, easily breakable or really thick and calloused. And that's kind of what we're targeting when we're doing the self-massage, because it can form kind of these fascial adhesions, which we think of as knots. And knots we don't necessarily want a lot of in the body. We want the fascia to be smooth and pliable so that we can be mobile and bendy and able to get through our days and things like that. But as the body ages, what happens is naturally there's less water in the fascia, it's less hydrated. So it's important to move the body and massage the body and things like that so that the fascia can be pliable and so that we're not as creaky and squeaky and uncomfortable. So that's kind of what we're getting at with the self-massage. We're trying to make the fascia more pliable, as well as just trying to make the whole body feel good and offering this self-care, self-touch, self-massage. And welcome to the Coffee Witching Hour. My name is Lacey, and this is my podcast that is all about yoga, birth, and raising kind humans. And today we're going to be talking about a really magical night that I had recently. It's the workshop that I have hosted throughout my career as a yoga teacher, and even before I started officially teaching yoga. It's been with me for a very long time. So I'm going to kind of dive into my recipe for this workshop and talk about the different things that I bring to the table for this workshop. And if you are a yoga teacher and you're looking for workshop ideas, this is one that has been tried and tested and had a lot of renditions and is really, really fun. So if you want to replicate this or find inspiration from this, please go ahead and do so. The workshop that I'm going to be talking about is my mindful chocolate tasting and self-massage yoga workshop. So it's really great. It's a lot of fun for me to teach, and the participants also have a lot of fun. It ends up being a really, really special, magical evening. And I'm going to get into all of the details and tell you how to host this kind of workshop and what kind of activities go down well. And I'm even going to have a little teeny tiny tasting at the very end of this podcast, so stay tuned for that special treat. Without further ado, let's dive into today's topic. So this yoga workshop started out when, even before I was a yoga teacher and when I was just a very avid practitioner, and when I was a student still, that's when this yoga workshop started out. I was a food literacy project fellow at Harvard School of Public Health when I was doing my master's degree there. And so what that meant was that I was tasked with organizing monthly events for our community that related to any part of the food system. So that's a very, very broad topic. Anything from environmental aspects to social justice aspects to health and nutrition. And because that concept is just so broad, and because I wanted to make my life a little bit more sustainable, when I organized these events, I usually chose topics that were both very interesting to me and that I was really passionate about, and ones that I kind of knew people who had interests and talents that they were able to offer to the community, instead of just choosing, like, I think when I first got there, I was like, oh, I'm going to get Elizabeth Gilbert to come and speak for us. Like, cool, but they said it was going to be $10,000 to have her speak or something crazy like that. So kind of more of the low-hanging fruit of community connections that I had made, and people who were cool in doing things and were able to offer things to our community that I didn't have to do too much work or use too many resources to organize. So I paired a lot of French cuisine with my food events, and did a lot of yoga also and mindfulness things. So this workshop first started when I was in my first year of the master's program, and I was not a yoga teacher myself, but knew a yoga teacher who was able to lead the class. And I had someone in the community who was able to do a meditation to open the class. And then from the yoga class, I led a very short, I think it was like a 3-minute chocolate tasting with everyone's eyes closed, just kind of, it wasn't even a chocolate tasting, it was a chocolate meditation, I think, where I was just talking about bean to bar, where chocolate comes from. It was a typed up script that I had, and I practiced that thing so many times, and I was still so nervous that I couldn't even participate in the yoga class, and I just kind of like sat in the corner and was like, oh my God, I'm about to teach. And then read it with everyone's eyes closed and was still like, oh my God, did that go okay? Did that go okay? So I think that kind of speaks to how I've evolved as a teacher and how far I've come from the point of just barely being able to read a 3-minute chocolate tasting script to now offering the full 2-hour workshop by myself. But from there, from Boston, then the workshop was, I offered it when I even before then, I offered it again in Boston the next year, a little bit differently. It was another chocolate and yoga workshop that I taught the yoga portion at that point after I became certified to teach yoga, and then had another food literacy project fellow offer a chocolate making demonstration where she tempered the chocolate and just made these beautiful heart-shaped chocolate molds. And I was doing this heart opening class, and then it was around Valentine's Day, so it was a really cool idea to do for that too. And then from there, the workshop evolved into this self-massage chocolate tasting combination that has worked out so well. When I went to Yangon and worked as a yoga teacher and intern at the studio, as well as intern at their vegan cafe, which is called Nourish Cafe. So I was organizing a lot of events for them too. And I don't remember if it was me or the teacher who I co-taught with or the studio owner, but between the three of us, we came up with this idea to offer the chocolate tasting with the self-massage. And I co-taught, a teacher led the self-massage portion, and then I did the chocolate tasting portion. And for that, I had a PowerPoint because I was coming from this academic background, of course, and wanted things scripted and planned and prepared, and made it a little bit of a heady lecture that went over really well. So well, honestly, that we offered it again the next day because it just was such a success. I think partly because it was this night of self-care, and Yangon is a very busy, fast-paced city, and it doesn't have a lot of chocolate. So because we were able to find a local chocolate brand and offer that to the community, I feel like it brought up a lot of feelings of nostalgia for home and things like that, because most of our community was this expat community. And it was just a really yummy, delicious offering to have. But I've since evolved from being teaching it as more of a heady academic lecture to being a more embodied practice. Not quite yet. So after I offered it in Yangon, when I moved to Vienna, I offered it again in the spring there as more of a PowerPoint lecture. But I offered it as a PowerPoint lecture, but we didn't have a projector in the yoga studio. So I had to use my tiny laptop to show them pictures. And I think that's the point where I was like, next level is just being able to do this unscripted and just to talk from my heart. And so when I moved to St. Louis, so I didn't offer this workshop again in Boston. It kind of lay dormant for a while. Pandemic in California, all of that. It took until moving to St. Louis. And then this was the first workshop that I offered in St. Louis. This was when the studio owner here was looking for workshops. This one jumped up to my heart and was like, yeah, if I'm going to offer a workshop, it's going to be this. So when I offered it here in St. Louis, the first time, the first one and the second one, the one that I offered last week, were very similar. They both had that self-massage portion that I taught and then the chocolate tasting portion. Whereas in Vienna, when I offered it myself, I was still kind of new to teaching, so I wasn't comfortable enough to offer the self-massage myself, so I just did like a slow flow and chocolate tasting. But here, the way that I've been offering it is about an hour practice of self-massage, and then the rest of the time is spent with that chocolate tasting. And it's just such a magical combination. It's gone over so well with participants here in St. Louis. And I think offering that chocolate tasting as more of an embodied experience, which I'll kind of get into how I do that more embodied tasting, is just something that is received so well. And it's just, people are able to like get out of their heads with the self-massage and then fully bliss out with the chocolate tasting. So this is something that's worked really, really well. And as I said, if anyone is open to replicating it and doing it in different ways and just taking inspiration from this workshop format, please do it. It's so needed and so yummy and delicious. But how do I do this self-massage and chocolate taste? Like, what's the nitty-gritty of doing it? That's what I'm going to get into next. So as I said, it's about an hour practice of self-massage, and then the rest is spent on chocolate tasting. But what we do first is some introductions and icebreakers. We go around the room, introduce ourselves, let everyone know what we're here for, like what our experience with chocolate and self-massage is and what we're looking for, so that I can then tailor the workshop better to the people who showed up to the space. And then what I did in this last workshop that I offered a couple of days ago was the icebreaker question was, what is your favorite memory? No, what is your favorite chocolate that you've ever tasted in your life? And as we went around the room and talked about our favorite chocolates, what was striking, and this is kind of the point that I was trying to make a little bit, is that everything is so closely tied to memory. So our senses are so closely related to memory. So when we smell chocolate, it might take us back to grandma's house when we were a kid. So those things are so closely intertwined. So that's kind of like the big introduction to why we love chocolate and why this is going to be such a magical night. But for me, my favorite two memories of chocolate, well, the best chocolate I've tasted in my life, essentially. One is when I did a 3-hour tasting experience at Hotel du Chocolat in London. I think that's what it was called. But it was 3 hours of bean to bar. So we had different parts of chocolate that we smelled and touched and taste, from the bean to the nibs to everything along the way, basically. And then we had a huge tasting sheet of chocolate, of their different chocolates that they offered. And by the end of that 3 hours, I was just like, couldn't taste anything. My palate was so obliterated by all the chocolate I had tasted. But that is one big memory I have of delicious, delicious chocolate. The other is a cacao ceremony that I participated in Paris when I lived there for about a month in the summer. And that was just another magical experience where the whole room was just kind of sitting in a circle, drinking this very concentrated, dark chocolate with maybe a tiny bit of sweetener, but mostly just dark chocolate melted in water, and singing, chanting, doing this kirtan that was in Sanskrit and French. And it was just this beautiful, magical experience. Everyone like dressed in white. All of the little objects in the yoga studio were just like made in this beautiful, like scientist, like old Dumbledore scientist, alchemist, like new age style of format. But anyways, it was a beautiful space and a beautiful workshop. And that's another really big, delicious memory I have of tasting chocolate. So yeah, we do that icebreaker, get into our why we love chocolate, the favorite experiences of eating chocolate. And then what I offered this last time was a meditation to get into our senses before we get into the self-massage practice. And that meditation, it's a common one. You've probably heard of it before, but it's looking around the room and first noticing 5 things that you see, and then listening for 4 things that you hear. So closing the eyes, listening, noticing 3 things that you touch. So the texture of clothing, yoga mat, temperature of the air could be it. And then smelling 2 things in the room. And then tasting 1 thing. So whatever you ate last, maybe that taste is still there on the tongue. Or we have tea in the yoga studio where I teach, so a lot of participants already had their tea there with them, so then maybe they took a sip at that point. But deepening into the senses, and then it's that self-massage practice where we go from toes up to the head, working into the different places of the body. And the kind of big concepts that I use for that self-massage, or the big methods, I guess, that I use are Abhyanga is one, which is warm oil, self-massage, and Ayurvedic practice. We don't use oil in the self-massage that I do, although I have as a participant in yoga workshops in the past that were more Ayurvedic focused. I just kind of show them the technique of doing it, and then they can do oil at home if they want. But we don't do oil just for logistic purposes, because it gets very messy, and then they would have to bring towels and things, and then getting oil for everyone. I don't know. It just seems like a logistic challenge. But it would be a cool idea in the future to do more of an Abhyanga type of warm oil self-massage for participants if they're open to that, and maybe smelling different types of oil, having some essential oils in there, and noticing the qualities of like coconut oil versus olive versus sesame versus jojoba, and those different types of things. That would be cool too. We didn't do that in this workshop, but ideas for future workshops. But so basically we do long strokes on the long bones in the body, circles around the joints, and work our way up to the top. And we interweave the massage with the massage balls as well as we're doing that. So the massage balls that we use are kind of like roll method balls. Jill Miller's roll method is another kind of concept or method that I use throughout the self-massage, and that's something that I've learned a lot from teachers in Boston and things, have experienced some of those techniques. But it's like a tennis ball sized ball that's a little bit, not necessarily softer, but it's a little bit squishier and a little bit stickier, so it grips onto clothing better, so it doesn't slip around like a tennis ball might. But we use that to work up the body, and we get into kind of the fascia is a little bit what we're targeting. So I talked just very briefly, again, this isn't an academic lecture, but I talked just very briefly about the fascia and Tom Myers and kind of his concepts. So I worked for Yoga U Online for a very long time, and Tom Myers was a very big name there, and he's like a fascia researcher and all of that. And the fascia is the surrounding of the muscles, the bones. It's what everything in the body is wrapped in. It's so like if you open an orange, not the orange peel, but the white that surrounds the fleshy part of an orange that it's wrapped in, and then you can kind of peel off. That's like fascia basically. And when I was in anatomy lab as an undergrad, we did dissections and things, and we used to think that fascia was just trash. And we would unwrap the body parts. Sorry if this is a little gross, but all of the fascia we would just dump in the trash. And it would be trash cans and trash cans and trash cans filled with fascia. And it was so interesting that we thought that way. I mean, I was always kind of like, wow, this is bizarre, because fascia is different. It can be different on different bodies, different places of the body. It can be smooth or rougher or thick or thin, easily breakable or really thick and calloused. And that's kind of what we're targeting when we're doing the self-massage, because it can form kind of these fascial adhesions, which we think of as knots. And knots we don't necessarily want a lot of in the body. We want the fascia to be smooth and pliable so that we can be mobile and bendy and able to get through our days and things like that. But as the body ages, what happens is naturally there's less water in the fascia, it's less hydrated. So it's important to move the body and massage the body and things like that so that the fascia can be pliable and so that we're not as creaky and squeaky and uncomfortable. So that's kind of what we're getting at with the self-massage. We're trying to make the fascia more pliable, as well as just trying to make the whole body feel good and offering this self-care, self-touch, self-massage. So like I said, we work up the body, toes to the crown of the head. And then once we've massaged everything using the floors, using the walls, using thumbs, fingers, palms, forearms, sometimes using all the things that we have at our disposal, then we kind of bliss out into Shavasana. And what I offered this year was tense and release until everything is just soft. And once we come out of Shavasana, that's when we get into everyone's favorite part, which is the chocolate tasting. So as I said, I've offered this workshop a lot of places around the world. It's evolved a lot. And as this workshop has evolved and as I've grown as a teacher and things like that, I've gotten to experience different chocolates along the way. So I always like to use a local chocolate company when I'm doing these workshops. So in Boston, it was Taza usually. And in Myanmar, when I was there, we did find a local chocolate tasting company, or a local chocolate making company rather. And then in Vienna somewhere, they're local. Like I said, with Myanmar, there's not a lot of chocolate there. So I was amazed that there was someone who made chocolate in Yangon. But yeah, we did find someone. Vienna, of course, there's going to be chocolate makers, obviously. And then here in St. Louis, these past 2 years, I've paired with Honeymoon chocolates. They're a little bit unique because they make their chocolates with honey as the sweetener. So it's a little bit of this sweet taste. I really like Taza too, that I mentioned that I have used in Boston because it's stone ground chocolate. So you get these little tasty granules and it's a little bit of a different texture than you might experience in other chocolates. But I've tasted a lot along the way, and so that is kind of one really unique thing about this workshop, is that reliance on those local chocolate companies and tasting their products. With the lecture, so after we bliss out through the body, then we bliss out even more, getting into this chocolate tasting. As I said, it started out more heady, more of an academic lecture, and it's moved into a more embodied practice. So what I've done recently is I've just, with these last few years of teaching the workshop, I just very briefly go over the process of making chocolate bean to bar, all the different steps. Not into too much detail, but just kind of what I find fascinating is the number of hands chocolate touches along the way, the number of people who come in contact with that chocolate, the number of countries where chocolate is and has been along that chain, from wherever the cacao is grown in Panama or Guatemala or wherever it may be, to the distribution, to meeting us where we are in the chocolate tasting workshop. So the number of hands it touches along the way, the number of stories that you encounter in that chocolate, and kind of weaving that into the experience of taste, because memory, story, all of those things are interwoven into that sensory experience. So then after I explain a little bit about how chocolate is made, we taste some samples of that process of chocolate making, so some byproducts along the way. I've offered different things in the different renditions of this workshop. Cacao nibs obviously are one that has been pretty consistently offered at the workshop. So Honeymoon gave me some cacao nibs. They also gave me some winnowed pieces that are not nibs, but just more of the winnowed piece that you can kind of see more of the texture of the original bean. And that, they said, could be used to make a tea. So that's something that I passed around and people could smell. So I offered smells of cocoa powder. In past workshops, I've had cacao powder to compare, which cacao is processed a little more minimally and usually at a lower heat. And so it's got more of those fruity fruity notes to the smell, whereas cocoa powder is a little more processed, and you can really smell the difference. It's like having a light roast versus a dark roast coffee, basically. The cacao powder is more of that light roast. What else? So Honeymoon, since it's made with honey, I've had some honey samples that they've they've donated to some of the honey that they use, which is like a local wildflower honey. And then sometimes I just, like this past time, I had some regular conventional chocolate chips that I offered after tasting the actual honeymoon chocolate, which chocolate chips just taste so dull and different, I think, compared to the honeymoon chocolate, the locally made chocolate. So it's an interesting comparison. But then when we get to the actual chocolate, and I just have a few teeny tiny final samples from last week, we involve all of our senses. So we start by looking at the chocolate and noticing how dark it is, noticing the color, the texture, the surface, the shininess, which can be an indication of tempering. And then we listen to the chocolate. So we do a little snap and notice how loud the snap is. And then we smell the chocolate, which, funny side note, so I have just had the flu this past week. Thankfully not at the chocolate tasting workshop because I can't smell anything right now. I lost my sense of smell completely when I had COVID, and I have never really had that loss of smell before. And it was like a week after I started symptoms. So it wasn't like my nose was like plugged up or anything. So it was really like the sensory neurons had been dulled or died or whatever. It came back after a few days, but it was just this bizarre experience of one day being able to smell the roses while I was out walking, and then the next day could smell nothing. And I had never experienced that before. And then when I got the flu this past week, I experienced that again. And it was also like my nose was a little bit plugged up, but usually I'm able to still smell something. And then with this cold, it's like nothing, nothing at all again. Anyways, it'll come back. I'm not too worried about it, but can't smell anything right now. So I can't get into the depth of the sensory notes, but we always have a sensory wheel that I pass out with this. And so I kind of explain to participants how to use that. You go from the inside out. So from the broadest taste to the most subtle. And what you taste is often what you smell. So you smell it and you notice any notes to start, but you kind of think, is it floral? And then, it might be more specific like jasmine or rose. Is it fruity? Maybe more specific like cherry or peach. But after you smelled it, you put it on your tongue, let it melt. And then you start to chew to aerate. And then you swallow. And you notice what comes up. And you do the same with the next piece. So as I said, I can't taste much right now. I can still taste, but I mostly just taste sweetness, whereas usually my sense of taste is a little bit sharper, so I can't get all the notes, but I don't remember what notes were in this chocolate. To me, it just tastes sweet right now. I think there were like notes of white peach and plum and things like that. But this is something that you can absolutely strengthen. Granted, colds, flu, COVID can take some of that strengthening away, temporarily at least. But this ability to detect the really subtle tastes and smells, and to place where a chocolate comes from, or if you're a wine drinker, where a wine comes from, that deepens with time and experience and all of that. So this is very much a practice of mindfulness and presence and being in the body and being in the senses. And so that's kind of the thing that we drive home in this workshop as well. So we spend a long time tasting, and then after we've tasted and guessed the notes and all of that, usually the past 2 years I've had some chocolate chip cookies that I've made, which I love making chocolate chip cookies. And with these past 2 years, I've made chocolate chip lavender cookies. So they've got some lavender buds and some lavender syrup that I make in them, as well as some nice chocolate, some chocolate chips, some walnuts. It's a really good cookie. And I use Forest and Meadow lavender, which is a local apothecary. So I pass around some samples of lavender, and the participants get to smell that as well. And this year, the participants just loved the cookies so much. It was wild. They were like, we would buy these. And I think that was kind of one of their favorite parts of the night when I passed around the cookies and they just like blissed out with those too after the whole chocolate tasting experience. So yeah, maybe going into the cookie business next, who knows? So the cookies obviously are a little bit different than the chocolate itself, but that's something that you can create with the chocolate, and tasting chocolate chip cookies in my lifetime is another favorite memory of chocolate of mine. All the times I've made chocolate chip cookies and all the places I've tasted them, for sure, is something special too. So that's pretty much the conclusion of the workshop and of the very special night that I said that I would love to do again, just in that same format, or do differently with other elements. Like I mentioned, the cacao ceremony that I did in Paris, I would love to do something like that. I don't think I could offer that on my own. I think I would need to pair up with a local musician in St. Louis because I can only play so much harmonium. So if you're a local musician and want to offer something really sacred and special with chocolate, then do reach out for sure. That would be a really fun one. I also love wine and coffee, and I'm a big lover of those things. And so some of the participants were like, yeah, you should definitely offer some kind of wine, coffee tasting workshop too, which I haven't figured out how to do as a yoga workshop, other than maybe kind of like a retreat format. So going to a winery in France and doing practices among the vines and then tasting the wine and things like that. Like, I think that would be an amazing workshop format, or not workshop, but a retreat format. We're going to where coffee is grown and doing a retreat there. Anyways, all really great future ideas. Yeah, if you want to join a workshop like that or a retreat like that in the future, please do reach out. Let me know. Let me know how you like this kind of overall workshop format and what you have done in the past if you're a yoga teacher, what kind of workshops you've offered similarly, and what elements you would weave in and what you would do differently. And if you want to join a workshop in France among the vines, going to wineries, reach out as well. Well, that's about all that I have for us today. Please do like, subscribe, rate, review, do all the things, support on Patreon, and let me know what you'd like to see more of. I will see you again soon.